Hey, welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. I'm your host, Coach Zach. I am here with Coach Gracie and Coach Caden, and today we are talking about caffeine. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a little shout out to a client of the week. And this week, we're giving a shout out to Lisa Bailey, who has just been crushing it. She looks phenomenal. She's lost a ton of weight. And then today, before I came in here, the reason I picked her, she had like double goblet squat, heavy kettlebells, and just like squatting it. It was a thing of beauty. So, Lisa, you're crushing it. Keep it up. You're doing phenomenal. So is Clint, her husband. But this one's just for Lisa. Don't be trying to steal her thunder, Clint. Sorry. You have to wait your turn. All right, guys, let's talk about caffeine. So should you not? What are the pros? What are the cons? Caden, you drink caffeine.
I do drink caffeine.
In what forms?
So I guess currently the caffeine that I do take is a pre-workout made by a company, or the brand is called Bucked Up.
Bucked Up. You probably shouldn't do that. That should be your first sign right there. Don't do that. Yep. Don't do that.
So I guess kind of talking on like benefits and negatives of caffeine. So I'm going to say roughly between 100 and 400 milligrams of caffeine a day for an individual person is going to be absolute like top end range of caffeine that you would want to intake to maintain health.
Okay. And like when you're doing the Bucked Up, it's like 4,000.
No, so it's only 200. So I was kind of talking about it in the office just before we came in here, actually. So
he actually took a scoop before we came in
took
here.
a little scoop
in preparation for this episode. You got to be hopped up on the sauce.
Little podcast prep.
Yeah.
So I guess the way that I look at caffeine. So there's certain people that they'll do their caffeine 30 minutes before a workout or like a pre-workout, which is just going to enhance, I'm going to say, the blood flow throughout the body as you're working out. I'm going to say that's more of the optimal, best way to use like a pre-workout. Personally, I use it more on, I'm going to guess, like a functionality side of caffeine. So
you're a functioning addict is what you're trying to tell everybody.
Slight functioning addict. So I'm gonna say in my like 8-hour work day, I'm gonna say I take about a fourth scoop every 2 hours of the pre-workout. So it gets me to my allotted 200 grams of caffeine.
It's just distributed.
But it's kind of distributed throughout the day as I kind of hit just like a little mental lull, or I'm like, man, I'm getting a little tired. All right, here we go. Pre-workout, and I'm pretty much locked in for the next like 2 hours. So I use it more, I'm gonna say, as a pick me up over, hey, I'm going to try and like optimize my workout per se with a pre-workout. Just because, I mean, there's some benefits to a pre-workout when it comes to working out, but I will say, like, if you're not already taking pre-workout, it is definitely not something I would recommend or be like, yup, you should be on this. I'm going to say at the end of the day, fitness as a whole, like a pre-workout specifically, is going to be something you can kind of toss out the window for the most part. Unless you just love caffeine and that's something that you love to do, then by all means, go for it.
Okay, so you're using caffeine for kind of like more of the cognitive benefit versus the physical performance benefit.
Correct.
And there's caffeine does both, right? So we can kind of break that down, but we've well established here that Caden is pro caffeine. Gracie, where do you land on the spectrum?
I feel like people get the idea that I'm like anti-caffeine, but that's not true. I'm just anti the 400 milligrams of caffeine that is like recommended as like your RDA. I think that's a little over the top in my opinion. I try and stay like 100 max.
In what form would you
get it?
Like
I also take pre-workout.
Oh, the truth comes out.
I do.
She's a closet pre-workout taker. We've been in that office how many times? I've never seen you ever take pre-workout.
Well, because I'm super sensitive to caffeine. So like a full scoop of the pre-workout that I take is like 150 milligrams. I'll take like maybe a third scoop. Maybe a half at most. So I'm really staying like between like 50 and 75
so you're
a day.
Very, very low dose.
Very minimal. Just to kind of, because I like to work out at like 6 in the morning. So it just kind of like pumps me up a little bit. Because, you know, I'm not always like super energized at 5 a.m. That's just not me. But So just like a little bit before I work out, but I always make sure that I have something to eat first, because if you take caffeine on an empty stomach, it will quickly go to your blood and increase your heart rate like way too fast, way too much. And like that's where it can kind of be an unsafe tactic. So I always recommend eating before you have any form of caffeine. But I just like a little bit of caffeine and that's it. But I can't take it late in the day at all. Like if I take it past 9 a.m., I'm up all night.
That's not late in the day. That's early in the day.
I know. I am like 9 a.m.
Okay.
Is like I can't take it any later.
So you're like a little bit of pre-workout first thing in the morning, then you go work out, and then that's it for your caffeine intake for the day.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. I want to just pause for a second and just highlight something, point something out that Gracie said she's not a morning person, but she gets up and works out first thing in the morning.
What about that?
I just want to bring attention to that of like, hey, everybody that's a slacker, you don't have to necessarily love getting up and being like a morning person to get up and do your workout.
That's true. Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, I like the mornings because I feel like they're peaceful, but for me, it's more of like a productivity thing.
Knock it out. And then
I love waking up, checking that like box, and then like moving on with my day.
That's like, once that's out of the way, you feel like then you can tackle everything else. But it's like you've already completed that task for the day. I like it. Just starting your day off with something hard, and then the rest is, and downhill from there.
Okay, and not it's the opposite of what I was gonna say. I feel like when you work out in the morning, like just kind of boosts your endorphins, and like the rest of the day, I feel like I have energy, so I don't need my caffeine because I'm like, okay, I worked out, I feel good, I feel great, I'm gonna go along with my day, and so I'm like, I don't need anything else.
Interesting. Okay. That's much better than using caffeine as a crutch like Caden over here.
Wouldn't recommend.
We live and die by whatever it takes mentality.
That's right. I'm somewhat guilty. I'm in the Caden camp, I don't do pre-workout. I never have. I don't like it gets me like too jittery and then my heart feels like it's going to explode. So I think it's just like too much for me, but I do like drinking coffee. Like I love coffee. And I now have gotten to a point where I just do like half calf coffee where it's half caffeinated. But I'm like you where I kind of distribute that throughout my day and throughout my morning. And then once I kind of get to like noon, there's no more caffeine after that point because otherwise it'll impact my sleep. But let's talk about like what caffeine does, right? So obviously for anybody that's ever had any type of caffeine, there's some side effects. But caffeine really is a inhibitor of adenosine, and adenosine is like your sleepy. It's the hormone that makes you sleepy, right? So when you take caffeine, it blocks your receptors, your neuroreceptors' ability to take up like adenosine. So then all of a sudden you don't feel as tired, but you feel more alert. You feel more, aware cognitively. You're functioning at a little bit higher level, just by kind of this mechanism of suppressing adenosine. So that's why a lot of times when somebody first wakes up in the morning, if they're used to caffeine intake to help them wake up, they kind of need that in order to get out of that like groggy phase. And then as soon as they have that first 2 ounces of coffee or whatever it is, now they feel like, oh, I'm awake and I'm starting to fire on all cylinders. It's because they've basically pushed that adenosine out of their system essentially. And now it's going to start building back up throughout the day until it gets to nighttime. And then now we feel sleepy and we're going to, go to bed essentially. And so that's why it's important not to cut your caffeine off at a certain point, because otherwise you're not going to feel sleepy. You're not going to feel tired. Well, you might feel tired, but you're not going to be able to fall asleep if you've had too much caffeine intake throughout the day. Let's talk about physical performance and how caffeine impacts that. So who wants to take that? Caden?
Yeah. Yeah, we can. Yeah, so I guess some of the effects that caffeine can play is it's going to increase the heart rate, which is automatically just going to make you more alert, more kind of, I'm going to say, firing on all cylinders. So a lot of times you'll see like caffeine being used for like athletic performance or weight training and things like that. And I'm going to say that's, I guess, one of the biggest benefits is it does help, I'm going to say, focus you a little bit more on that particular task at hand. I guess that's kind of one of my, at least my biggest thoughts on the benefits of caffeine.
There's some sort of, I don't know exactly the correct chemical sequence that takes place, but I know that caffeine increases the amount of calcium that you have available at the muscle tissue level. And so when your muscles are contracting, like your muscle cells are contracting, there's what you refer to as there's like a chemical reaction, and your muscle tissue is using some of that calcium to contract the muscle tissue. And so one of the reasons it's believed, there's not a ton, it's kind of a phenomenon. They're like, well, we think this is the way that this works, but we're not 100% sure, that you can actually contract a muscle harder when you have caffeine in your blood system. And so that's one of the reasons why it's believed that caffeine impacts physical performance. But there's obviously, like, energy wise, you just feel more energetic during the workout. Your heart rate's a little bit elevated, and you have better endurance. You don't feel as fatigued, again, because there's not as much adenosine in your system. But somewhere within, like, the actual, at a cellular level, there's something taking place that we know has to do with calcium and the impact that caffeine has on that and your ability to fire a muscle, like, at a higher rate, essentially, which I guess is like a performance-based thing. So, Gracie, you have anything you want to add to that?
I've actually never heard that, but it's really interesting. I feel like that's obviously true. Because, like, when you take pre-workout... Like,
obviously. I
don't know. I was just trying to think about, like, there's been times when, like, I don't know, I'm out of my pre-workout or I'm just not taking it. And it's really only, like, a little bit. But you notice such a difference. Like, in your workouts, like, I notice I just don't have the same amount of energy, and I just don't really want to be there when I don't have my 50 milligrams of caffeine. Like, it totally... I don't know. I think that's really interesting, and I think caffeine before a workout is super beneficial because, whatever time you're going to work out, like, you're probably going to be a little bit tired. You're kind of going to be a little demotivated, and so just having, even if it's something small like 50 milligrams, just to boost you a little bit, set you on the right track, I think it's really beneficial, especially if you have, like, big performance goals.
Yeah, like, the only time I'll ever have an energy drink is on Fridays before we do our team workout, just because I know Caden's going to run circles around me if I don't.
So. Still does. I don't know if it's helping.
Oh, man. Well, imagine what it would be like if I didn't, So sometimes I'm like, oh, man, I got to try to keep up today. I'm going to have to do a little energy drink to hang. So, but I do notice, I mean, it's anecdotal, right? But at our level of just experience, but I do notice that, like, my performance is much, much higher if I am caffeinated going into a workout versus not caffeinated. So from a performance standpoint, I mean, it's been proven that you have less fatigue, like better endurance during a workout, and your strength actually increases during a workout. Now, how much, obviously, like what a percentage increase is going to be is obviously going to be different based off of how much caffeine you've had, and too much. There is a limit, yes, right? Because caffeine can kill you if you drink too much. But also from person to person, there's kind of some different research that's shown anywhere from like a 3% to 11% kind of increase. Just kind of, there's some variables there. But cognitively, obviously, like, you're more alert, you function a little bit better. Fat loss, so there have been a couple of studies that show caffeine's impact on both your metabolism, so the rate at which you're burning calories. It increases thermogenesis, so the thermogenic effect is like your body's producing more heat, therefore you burn more calories. And then there's also, there's been a couple studies on how caffeine can actually like free up some fat tissue that then is available for your body to utilize as energy, versus that fat tissue being harder to get into a state physically where your body will then, like I should say chemically, where then your body will actually burn that. So there's some fat loss, benefits if you're somebody that's trying to lose weight. Caffeine can help, and caffeine's probably the number one ingredient in like every fat burning supplement there is out there, like special supplement.
Well, and I think part of that is because caffeine actually makes you feel satiated.
That's another.
So yeah, it's kind of like, it's a toss up. I think you have to be careful with how much you're taking and still like making sure that you are like eating your meals and stuff, because there was a period in time where there was like high school age girls or whatever, they were like, it was like, oh, did you have lunch today? No, but I had my iced coffee. And like, because they would like replace it as like a meal, because it was, oh, the caffeine, I'm not full or I'm not hungry anymore. Like I feel full. So just being aware that like you are still eating and like eating the right things. But I do think caffeine can be beneficial.
That's a great point, because when it comes to like intermittent fasting, lots of people are like, well, I'm just not hungry in the morning. And I'm like, okay, no problem. Just don't drink any coffee and let's see what happens. Right. And because a lot of times it's not that you're not hungry or that your body isn't needing that fuel. It's just that you're masking that with caffeine intake. And so you're drinking like 2, 3, 4 cups of coffee in place of meals. And so that's just suppressing your appetite to get you far enough into your day that then you're like, okay, now it's time to eat. And that's obviously not healthy. So I'm not saying that intermittent fasting is bad, but a really good test for you to do is like, if you're one of those people, I'm just not hungry in the morning, well, just don't drink coffee and let's see what happens. And then tell me if you're hungry or not. Because a lot of times we're going to need to reverse the order of, hey, eat first, then you can have your coffee or, your caffeine, whatever.
I think that's so important. People need to eat food before they consume caffeine.
Yes.
Like I'm big on that.
Well, and then you don't drink as much too, because if you're not, drink water, eat food, then have your caffeine. It should be in that order, not wake up, pound your coffee, because you also don't want to become dependent on caffeine. Because if you have too much, like anxiety is a side effect, insomnia is a side effect, obviously heart issues if you're drinking too much or consuming too much. So you just have to be aware of all those things. You don't want to become dependent on caffeine, and it's a drug. It's very easy to do. You have to be smart and methodical about your caffeine intake. And if you're doing it for performance, you're doing it for cognitive benefits, then there's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. There's no science that says that there is. I mean, it's totally beneficial. There's lots of health benefits to it. Just be smart about how you go about doing it. So, all right, guys, that's all we got for you today. We'll be back next week with more great stuff. Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.